If we don't practice perceiving and responding to a world that's actually alive, how will our responses support and nourish the living world? We're doing good because we are recycling bottle caps. Like, oh, come on. In a complex, moving system, you cannot simply replace the parts. Because the problem isn't in the parts, it's in the relationship between the parts.
Nora Bateson is a filmmaker, author, and director of the Bateson Institute that guards the legacy of her father, Gregory Bateson. It was through his cybernetic way of thinking that Bateson argued that we have to think of reality not quantitatively as one big spreadsheet of inert matter. Instead, to truly understand nature, we need a totally new conception of information, what Nora Bateson calls warm data.
We're used to thinking of information as something you can grab, measure, state, define. And what we're talking about with warm data is something that's in constant relational responsiveness. If you're in this other way of thinking, the reductionist way of thinking, the possibility is edited out of the perception. And I don't think we can afford to do that right now.
Yeah.
There are times when I catch myself believing that there is such a thing as something which is separate from something else.
Complex systems thinking and cybernetics eventually led Bateson to the logical conclusion that we have to study nature as an ecology of mind. We usually think about minds as having boundaries. So I'm sitting here with my mind, you're sitting there with your mind. You're saying we cannot basically draw these boundaries so easily. Is that so?
That's so. There's mind in a meadow, there's mind in a forest, there's mind in a culture. It's not just an inert world we're walking around in. So the thing that gives me hope is to go to the place where it looks like there's none and to see the creative process take place.
Very warm welcome, Nora, in Leiden. Nice to meet you here.
Thank you.
In thinking about this conversation, you to me are a very special guest for a couple of reasons. You carry the lineage, of course, of your father's thinking, Gregory Bateson. It is good to mention, I think, for people who do not know him, I think most people will have heard of him, but he was an important philosopher in the 20th century, anthropologist, social scientist, linguist, cyberneticist, and he made contributions to many fields. And you now are president of the Bateson Institute, and you build basically on your father's work, right, with also terms you have introduced and scientific work you're working on, like warm data, semathecy, things I'd love to touch upon. Your presentation today was on the ecology of mind. The Essentia Foundation is all about metaphysics, and basically it maps one-on-one on what our foundation is about, that all is mind, all is consciousness. And that ecology of mind then, to me, is, if that is so, if we take that metaphysic as the most plausible thing, then the ecology of mind of Gregory Bateson and of Nora Bateson, what you are working on, seems to me sort of like the praxis of how to then go about. And that's what fascinates me so in talking to you here and in reading Combining. There are many ways in which we could start this conversation. Maybe nice to start with an image, the image you started your presentation with, of two moths with the eyes of an owl on their wings. We have it here in the book, right? I'll show it on the screen. Could you maybe touch upon what ecology of mind is with that image in mind, and maybe refer to that image? Can we bring those two together?
So yeah, first let's address the sort of multiplicity of the phrase ecology of mind. So on the one hand, what we're referring to is the way in which our minds, our epistemological ways of knowing, our ways of perceiving the world, are forming and shifting and responding to an ecology of different sorts of experiences. Some are in your microbiome, some are cultural, some are historical, some are technological, some are coming from the education system. This question of how do you know what you know? How do you perceive what you perceive? And what are the many ever combining filtrations and not just that, but also what's flavoring or shaping those ways in which you and I can perceive. And I think, so that's one piece is to look at the way that our own perception is within an ecology of perception and filters. Okay, another way of looking at that is to look at the notion of mind, okay, which for my father was not about the brain in your head. Okay, the notion of mind is actually a notion of life. And he's calling it mind because there is a very a pushback against something being of a mental abstraction and something being of life. So the mind and body, for example, being separated and the sort of Cartesian split. So to look then at mind as an ecological process. So both of those things are happening. So that there's mind in a meadow, there's mind in a forest, there's mind in a culture, in so much as all of the elements, the participants, the organisms, the entities are responding, communicating, learning. It's not just an inert world we're walking around in. Life itself is responsive. So,
and it's not your father and you are not talking metaphorically here, right? It's so that, because we usually think about minds as having boundaries. So I'm sitting here with my mind, you're sitting there with your mind. Maybe, and that would be already for a lot of people pretty woo to say that trees might have a form of cognition, perhaps consciousness. I know in biosemiotics that's we're open to questions like these, but then these are still there are boundaries around these minds. But you're saying, when I hear you talk, that we cannot basically draw these boundaries so easily. Is that so?
That's so. Where's the edge of the tree? Right? When we say, does the tree have a mind? Where's the edge of the tree? Is it the bark? Is it the root system? Is it the bacteria and the nutrition system that's coming through the soil? Is it the way the mycelial organisms underground are transferring nourishment between the trees? Is it the squirrels and the insects? Is it when we say this is a tree, how did that happen? How many hundreds of thousands of years and how many millions of organisms in relationship have come to become that tree? So you're not just looking at a tree. And I think if you just take a snapshot of a tree and you say, this is called a tree, what's obscured there is all of those incredible interdependent processes that have allowed that seed, that acorn, if it's an oak tree, to become an oak tree. But how did that happen? And it's really holding the contextual and transcontextual relationships and communication as part of whatever it is we're calling an entity. It'd be better if we call it a treeing.
I was just thinking about that. That was sort of what Alan Watts, it came to me via Alan Watts that we should talk in verbs, right? It's treeing and exactly. Within sort of reductionism, so say we do not see the tree as treeing, but we see it as this is a tree which we can reduce to on a cellular level to biochemical processes, which we can predict and reduce. So that's a classical materialistic way of thinking. Then already in the 20th century, in the sort of mid-20th century, we noticed that you cannot look like systems. That's not a way to predict the behavior of systems, or even you cannot control them like that. And the movement that studies that sort of that way of how you then can sort of understand systems better, their feedback loops and how they behave. It's called the study of cybernetics, which influenced, of course, computing and AI. And your father was a pioneer in that field. Could you tell a little bit about sort of because he had sort of a strange position among von Neumann and Wiener, and then we had Gregory Bateson, and he had a sort of different take, right, on the whole cybernetics.
Yeah, I mean, to begin with, I think the thing about my father was that he was doing this cybernetic systemic work before the Macy conferences happened. So if you look at his early work, Novin and some of the early papers that he wrote before the Macy conferences ever happened in the 50s, there was a series of conferences in which a group of people from lots of different disciplines got together, and they were trying to have these conversations that were funded by the Macy's Foundation to sort of figure out how different aspects of a system come together to do things, okay? And if it was possible to control them, what's the nature of this way in which different aspects of a system communicate with each other, shape each other, shift each other? Because what people were noticing was that when you're working with any kind of systemic thing, whether it's a culture or a school or a family or even a computer, that very often, if you make any sort of a prompt, if you think you're going to create a cause and effect that's a linear cause and effect, and you push it here, that something happens in some other way. And the results of that prompt come out in a completely surprising and seemingly non-correlative way. And so many of the problems that are facing humanity, especially today, are of existential level. And yet the urgency to respond to these questions, whether they're economic crisis or climate crisis or various kinds of cultural or technological crises that are happening, political crises, is to try to address them as though they were inside of a pretty basic car engine, right? Where, okay, there's something wrong with the timing, we change the timing belt. There's something wrong with the distribution we change the distributor.
Yeah.
There's something wrong with your transmission, we change the transmission. In a living system, in a complex moving system, you cannot simply replace the parts. Because the problem isn't in the parts, it's in the relationship between the parts. And those relationships are in motion. They're not static relationships. So how then do you create something that you might call an action or a strategy? So this has been something that I think the Macy's group found a new word for. Okay, this is where the word cybernetics came to be, and then cybernetics entered a lot of different disciplines. So it entered family therapy, it entered computer science, it entered information theory, it entered all sorts of technological stuff. It entered in many directions. There was, because it came from many directions, right? If you have a transdisciplinary group and everybody in the group takes it back to their discipline, then it's going to enter the world in multiple ways. So the difference, though, is that, first of all, like I said, my dad was already doing that. There just wasn't a name for it yet. And I think he really enjoyed the collaboration of that group. He used to say that it gave him hope, where he felt no hope after World War I and World War II.
I read in your book how he
Yeah.
sort of he had to sort of sabotage communication of the enemy, right? Of the and that it sort of really drove him to sort of made him really depressed, because his work was all about sort of the communication and sort of really open communication, that he had to do this for the good. And so that I just that sort of found touching to read, so that it was such a hard thing for him to do. But
let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah, sure.
Because I think it's a really good example. So in Navan, which was my father's book about his time in New Guinea, he brings in the term schismogenesis. Now, schismogenesis is a big, fat, juicy word, but it's so important right now to be thinking about this concept. So schismo is to break, just like a schism, right?
Yeah.
And genesis is to create. So schismogenesis is the study. It's an understanding of a way of naming particular kinds of relational patterns that lead to the breaking of the relationship. Okay, so when we think about life making life, what you're talking about is all the organisms that make a tree have been in relationship that made relationship that made relationship. Right? That's lifing. Okay?
Yeah.
And when you think about schismogenesis, it's relationship that breaks relationship. So he talked about two different types of schismogenesis, and then there's a third one that a Finnish group brought in. And in this moment, I think this work is critical because we're dealing with so much polarization alongside a general runaway. Okay.
Yeah, it's also good to unpack that term, by the way.
Yeah, a runaway where you get, something comes unraveled and it leads to something else coming unraveled and it leads to something else coming unraveled, and you get a runaway. So, when you get sick and first you might feel like, I don't feel so good. And then my throat hurts a little bit, and then a raging fever comes. But then if you're not careful, you could get dehydrated. And if you get dehydrated, then your body starts to go into a kind of a runaway. You're sick, you don't really have what it takes to fight back, you can't hold food down, but you need the nutrients, your organs start to shut down, things start to go wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, that's an example of runaway in a living system, the living system being your body.
Yeah.
Now, if you can extrapolate that into broader systems, societies, cultures, jungles, right? What happens when you enter a rodent pesticide into a system and you think you're just going to kill the mice? But you don't just kill the mice, because the owls eat the mice and the voles get into it and the caterpillars get into it and basically all the organisms in the ecosystem start to get broken relationships. The things that eat the owls, the things that ate the lizards, and so then they don't have any food, and eventually you get into a runaway.
What fascinates me around runaway, that term, thinking about it also in terms of cybernetics, if you have feedback, feedback is a very important concept in cybernetics. The system get feedback loops, etc. And we know that term. And could you say that a runaway is also sort of an absence of certain feedbacks, or are sort of not paying attention to those feedbacks of nature? Because there's not something directly telling us the moment we do that, sort of we think in sort of after Second World War, when we started sort of genetically engineering and coming up with pesticides that at first seemed to sort of solve sort of the food crisis worldwide. So feedback says good for the system, and then but then in the end, we see how detrimental it is to our planet. Is it so that there were feedbacks we just didn't pay attention to, or how should we think about that?
I think this is the whole issue, is that essentially, if you've been trained to think in the school systems as they exist right now, and you've lived in the world for a while in the way that it is right now, and you're coming not from a culture where the language is reiterating the nature of the interdependency of life, or the spiritual practices are about the interdependency of life, but from a culture where the economic system, the positioning of your identity, etc., are what's valuable, then it becomes very difficult. It's as though we have an atrophied muscle of perception where you can't see anymore those relationships because you're not living in them. You don't have words for them. We don't have honor for them. It's not part of our life. So the last few hundred years of reductionist science and of industrial modernity has actually obscured those interrelational processes. So it's not like there's some sort of mystery. It's not like they don't exist. It's just that anybody who's been trained to perceive the world and to communicate and to succeed in a world of these institutions has been trained out of perceiving.
Trained out of perceiving. I think, an example that during your presentation, you talked about how that plays out in language, for instance. You said, we now say, I'm going to school to learn a language, or I'm going to the grocery store to get some yogurt. And that word "to" is very telling. Could you sort of recount what you explained? Because I found that sort of very insightful.
Yeah, it really illustrates, doesn't it, this idea that prior to the factory, now the factory is a reductionist assembly line, right, where everything's broken into parts.
Henry Ford, right?
Right, and it's broken into parts to produce and to create production of products, right?
Yeah.
So the factory is going to do better if they can create more products.
Yeah.
Faster.
Fact.
Okay? This is not how a meadow works. This is definitively not how a meadow works. So the difference is an ecological difference, and it's a whole world of perception. So prior to the factory, people lived in a world in which that, like I was saying, the relationships are obscured now. They weren't obscured. There were other things that were obscuring them, but not to the extent that they are now. So you had the factory come in, and then the school system came in, and it was actually, they were modeled after each other, right? And people were going to school to essentially become factory workers, to become able to produce things. So people used to say, I'm going to market and buying yogurt. They probably weren't buying yogurt because you probably made that.
Yeah.
But and buying grain. And when you say that, then there's a world of things that can happen. I'm going to market. And what will happen? And I'm going to get some grains. I wonder what grains will be there. What will happen there? That's a whole world of things. And if you come back with no grains, no big deal. There's a story.
Yeah.
Right? But if you go to market to buy grain and you come back with no grain, you failed. Right? And then also if you go to market to, the question is, how long did it take? How much did you get? Immediately you get into all of the I hate this word, but the value systems of modernity, of optimization, efficiency, maximization, right? Profitization, commercialization. I'm going to school and I'm learning to read. I'm going to school, and that's an adventure.
Yeah.
And I'm learning to read is different than I'm going to school to learn to read. And if you don't learn to read, you failed, which, especially in that, you can feel the pain of the little child who's wondering why he can't or she can't, they can't read. right?
Yeah,
And
that's touching. I'm a parent, and the moment you say that, that stuff, like, not to say this is a tree, but to be more accurate, this is what we call a tree, or say it is treeing. I'm really trying to do that more with my kids, because I think I've already, even though I work for a foundation that promotes analytic idealism philosophically, like, I'm also sort of just programmed with language still full of sort of a different, that just echoes a different metaphysics, namely one of reductionism and materialism. And and your work makes that sort of acutely aware in me. So that's that. And so I'm sitting down here with you and we're doing an interview, and that already to me changes something.
It's so creepy, isn't it? How it gets into the intergenerational communication. I mean, I know with my own kids, and growing up, you said I'm holding this lineage, which is a really interesting thing to do, by the way. And to pass on, right? What were the ways in which I grew up in a household where there were a different sort of collection of intrinsic tacit assumptions about life, where the tacit assumption was that the world is already interconnected and it's all in motion, and this is a system that cannot be controlled, right? That systems are squishy and wiggly and you can't control them. So this was a basis of our household. And it wasn't like people were running around all the time saying those words, but that those notions and those perceptions came through everything. How we do breakfast, how we take a walk, how you do anything. So then when I had kids, I suddenly realized, because their dad wasn't really, he hadn't grown up in the same kind of household. So he had a different set of programming. And boy, is it ever programming of like what you say to your kids.
Yeah.
And even I would find myself even in these grammatical traps where if you don't stop doing that, and then I would realize I was in a trap, because the next thing I'm going to have to say is then. If you don't stop, then I will what? What am I going to do? Right? I didn't mean that. What I meant was, I really want you to stop doing that. And based on our relationship, I want you to hear me. Not if you don't stop doing that, you're going to be grounded, or I'm going to take away your dessert tonight, or you won't get any this, or, this sort of punishment and reward and just all the programming that we live within. And it really comes out in the intergenerational work of just being a parent and also of being someone's kid.
And I think, was it sort of a safe childhood for you in a sense? Because I associate wrongly, perhaps, that you want to give as a parent your children sort of clarity. This is how the world works. And this is going to touch upon a poem in your book, which really touched me. So I'm already having difficulty having left sort of a Christian upbringing and that whole sort of system of thinking, that I cannot give my two children that clear metaphysical, mythological stories that I was brought up with, that at that time felt like safe to me, or sort of just nice to have these stories. And sometimes feels like I'm giving them an unstory. I'm telling what it is not, or that I'm still myself in search. I'm now coming to grips with that, and I see beauty in it. But that to you, your dad was like, when you were writing your book, it was like he didn't buy into any frames, societal frames. So that as a kid must have also been difficult at times, wasn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And disappointing. I think it's more disappointing. I think I was so sad that when I went to school that I couldn't actually have conversations with my teachers. When they wanted me to write papers, they wanted me to write papers about the things that they already said. Why would I write that paper? Why would I not write a paper about something new I was thinking about? I still don't really understand why teachers want you to write the paper the stuff that's already been said. So it felt really dead. It felt like all the magic in the world was drained out. Where when I was home, the world that was at home was a world of really awe-inspiring complexity and relational process. And it's fascinating. I mean, how did the fish come to look like that? What is the context in which the fish learned to be like that? Or what's happening with the weather tonight? And I remember, staying out all night with my dad in the rainstorm and talking about lightning and seasons. And life was just through his description. It came with the difficulties and the beauty of what ecology really is, and the deep communicational relational interdependencies were right there. So it was sort of, it was sad. And then trying to, do things, go to the doctor, and the doctor is going to identify a symptom and treat the symptom. But even as a small child, I knew that the symptom was just an expression of some other contextual processes, and there were probably multiple causations, not one. And so what a strange thing to take this pill for that symptom. What else is it going to do?
Yeah, because your father was all about connecting the patterns. Different beautiful ways of saying that, right? But what connects everything. And also, he popularized a quote, it's Korzybski, you have pronounced that correctly, the philosopher, the map is not the territory, which is so close, of course, also to sort of idealism, that we confuse our models of the world with the world. But you state in your book and in your film about your father also, nothing was what it was, right? What we see, the thing is not the thing.
The thing is not the thing. Yeah, the name is not the thing named. So it was disappointing as a child to see that the rest of the world wasn't really up. But on the other side, we did a lot of traveling. And so that was a really incredible opportunity to see that in other cultures, people did things differently. And so for me, I think that was probably the saving grace, is that it wasn't as though I was only living in two worlds, one in which there was interdependency and one in which there was reductionism. There were multiple versions, and different cultures had different ways of talking about, of perceiving, of dealing with the basics, life, money, love, death. So these things are not just perceivable in one way. And so learning that from an early age was an incredible opportunity for me.
Could you explain a very important notion, a theory your father worked on, and what he's famous for also, which is called double bind. What is it, and how are we sort of trapped in it?
So the double bind, okay, not the double blind. Okay, so there's sometimes some confusion there. The double bind theory is a theory that it was popularized and first written up by my father and some colleagues at the Mental Research Institute in Palo Alto. And it was originally written up in relationship to schizophrenia. I'm saying this because actually that's not the origin of any of this, but it's what is the known origin. And the double bind theory is essentially this, that through various contexts, you can get stuck. So the beginning piece is to recognize that all living organisms are living in multiple contexts simultaneously. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're in a context of relationship with me right now, but you also have a context of communication with your microbiome, in which a very different kind of communication is taking
Yeah.
place. Okay. You have a context with your family, and you have different communication and relationships there than you have with the tax man, for example. Or when you go to the driver's
Yeah.
department,
Yeah.
okay, or when you enter an airport, or right. So you have the capacity to be in multiple contexts simultaneously. You're alive in your body, but you're also alive in a culture.
Yeah.
Okay, you are alive in a body and alive in a culture, but you're also alive in a biology, in the world of living organisms. So these different contexts that we navigate seamlessly, I might add, through our day. I mean, if you tell any story in your life, any story, like how you came to choose the shoes you're wearing today, that story will have in it multiple contexts of life: culture, economics, family, health, ecology, all sorts of things. So we live in multiple contexts, as do all the organisms. They don't have institutional contexts, but other ones. These contexts can produce conflict. Okay, so you can get trapped in a way that you want to fix something that's happening with your body. Let's say that you're feeling sick. But in order to really tend to your body, you need to take a break and stay home and rest. But you can't stay home and rest because in another context, you have to be part of an economic system. So you have to go to work, right? So if you don't heal your body, you can't go to work. But if you do heal your body, you could lose your work.
Yeah.
Right? You go to work,
Yeah.
you could really destroy your body and make it so you can't go to work. Okay, so that's an example of a double bind where you have two contexts where when you try to address one, you get a failure in the other one. You can have a double bind in more than doubles too, by the way. But the issue is that in order to essentially find a solution to one situation, you send something else into existential crisis. So that's sort of how you describe a double bind. I could add that another piece of this is that, generally speaking, you can't speak to it. There's nobody to say. There's no department that you can complain, right?
Yeah.
But that's a piece of the puzzle that. There's been a lot of work on double binds that's gotten into meta-communication that's really based in human communication systems. And I just have to say, for the record, the double bind was never, ever meant to be, according to my father, solely a theory for human communication. It was meant to be an evolutionary theory.
I get it.
Right? And so this was a shift because basically every organism, as it is learning to be in its world, every organism that's in an interdependent system, say you're a mouse and you're living in a meadow, the meadow is going to change. All the organisms are changing. The day is going to come when the mouse is going to have to change, when all the things the mouse used to do to survive, it can't do anymore. Because its context has changed. All right? But that's the only thing the mouse knows to do. And so the mouse can't do what it did or it dies. And it doesn't know what else to do because it just doesn't know. Okay, so that's a double bind too.
And one that touched me, Nora, was one in your book you write it. And maybe we can, if I may ask you to read the poem on motherhood in these days, because you write in your book, let me look it, I have the quote here. On the one hand, to survive, we must feed our children breakfast. On the other, to feed our children, it is necessary to participate in inherently deadly systems. So I'm buying food, which is to keep my children alive. I'm killing an ecosystem because the fruit I want to feed my people, of my children, have pesticides on them. And I think in modernity, in our modern society, we are trapped on a daily basis. If we would be, it's just incredible the amount of double binds like these, like
Right.
sitting here doing this interview, the equipment, the stuff we buy to just be here able to do something good for the world. I have to buy equipment that might, that one was sort of, then I realized that double bind concept, it's like all around us.
We're so in it. We're so in it. Yeah. And so I wrote, I think you want me to read the poem.
Yeah, please do. Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Well,
So, yeah.
You know, I have kids. And bringing children into the world is a responsibility. It's an honor. It's an act of creativity. And as mammals, we need to be able to give our kids the possibility of having kids. I don't know about you, but my kids are coming close to this age of having kids, and they're looking around saying, I don't want to bring any kids into this world. Is it possible to express the depth of sort of existential pain around that? I don't know. And how, what are my kids looking forward to? What's there? What's a horizon? So I'm not alone. There's a whole lot of people out there whose kids are in this, and so I wrote this poem, and it's in combining. It's called Mama Now, but you could read it as Papa Now or Auntie Now.
I read it as Papa Now, and then I sent it to my wife. For her, it was Mama Now. Yeah.
Uncle Now, Auntie Now, Grandma Now. I'll read it to you. Mama Now. It's for my children, what it's like to be your mama. Your eyes will see the derailing of assumptions. Your hands will hold the crumble of the old matrix. I do not have any authority to lean into. I have empty pockets where parents used to advise their children. I do not have any maps, myths, or mother wisdom for you. I can fix your breakfast, but not the culture. And when you ask how to be a good person, I cannot lie to you. Everything you touch in a day is in some way bloodied. You have been born into an edgeless violence. But I will not judge or measure you against a bygone metric. I'm here too, ready to learn with you, unsure how to be or who to be. I can only read fragments of your worry, as the future is a horizon of confusion. I cannot protect you. And yet it is my only job. Aching as I witness from this side of the hourglass, other generations of parents knew the outlines. School, career, family, and retirement. But your life will be another shape entirely, forming in the fractures. And when you say you need a goal, I offer you an expired ticket. Superficial memes roll off the tongue, right into your bullshit detector. Success in the existing system is not going to do you much good. Your integrity is your rage, and I will nourish it. Your dignity is your curiosity, and I am tiny beside it. Your courage is your pain, and I will sing to it with you. We will riot together. We will notice the nuance of small graces in the day. We will wash the grit of loss for each other. I am your mama, and your future is the story of a storm. I am your cabin, your boots, your rucksack.
Thank you, Nora. It's just beautiful. And where to start? I read this, so like I said, I sent it to my wife and I say, yeah, this is about it. And in a sense, that's also painful to say that there's nothing new. That what you just it's just the finger of the zeta plek, and that's just the finger on the sore point. This is what I sort of know, but then you make it explicit in this beautiful poem. But it's also liberating to just be honest about it. Mm-hmm. Do you understand what I'm saying? To be honest, I don't know what we're in. I do not have an answer. And this system is, don't want to use curse words, it's just messed up. And we have to find a way. And what I loved in reading your book, and maybe this will bring us to warm data, the cold approach to this would be to reductionistically, materialistically think, okay, polycrisis. Let's map the polycrisis. Let's see where we can fix it, what interventions we can come up with. You showed the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, all those logos and stands, health, the good gender equality, and systems thinking, and we know that is the way of thinking that got us here. So you say stuff in your book that today's solutions are yesterday's solutions are today's problems. We know that if we go about it like that, we'll just create new problems. But you have a hopeful answer. Something I think is hopeful is where you say that we have to meet this and not match it. Mm-hmm. Could you sort of explain on how to meet what you just told, this story of motherhood, how to meet that and not to match it, and what you mean, of course, by meeting and matching?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. Meet, not match. This was a big opening for me, I think, in my own work of what does a systemic response look like? How do we think about making an action when we're trying to deal with a symptom? But it's not a direct response, because if you make a direct response, then you're just treating the symptom. So what is that response that looks indirect, that doesn't exactly fix exactly what you wanted to, lay out as the issues, but addresses the underlying conditions, or shifts the whole system in a way that it can learn to be in the world in another way. So to match a problem, so in the Mama Now poem, for example, how do you be a good person? Well, you're in a world full of things where you get on the bus, and the bus is made of plastics and metals that have been mined, and it's running on petroleum, or it's running on electric, but the electric is produced in ways that no matter what you do, no matter what you had for breakfast, no matter what clothes you're wearing, or who sewed them, or who made them, we're guilty. We're drenched in the blood of the last few hundred years of reductionism and exploitation. So you could look at that and you could say, okay, well, let's fix it. Okay, we're going to make fair trade everything. We're going to, get off grid. We're going to live in this other way. And that would be matching. Okay, because to match the problem is the same thinking that got us into it. Right? And to meet the problem looks very different. To meet the problem looks like helping your kids come into the world, knowing what the situation is and how to nourish the people that they are around in every circumstance, how to nourish themselves, how to be able to undermine the very isolationist, individualistic, exploitative concepts that have been driving these institutional systems. So the poem ends, for example, with this phrase, I am your cabin, your boots, your rucksack.
Yeah, rucksack. I like that.
And this is, how do you deal with a double bind? Okay, so if you want to deal with a double bind, if you want to have some sort of success of getting out of a double bind, the way you do it is not to fix the problem. The way you do it is to reach from another context. Okay, so if the contexts here are the exploitation of the world and the need to bring up your children, and if you bring them up in a way that they're numb to the exploitation of the world, so they're happy about being in it, then you have the problem of that they're numb to the exploitation of the world. You don't want that.
No.
But if you bring them up so that they're sensitive to the exploitation in the world, they're going to be in great pain for everything that they have to partake in, and you don't want that.
Yeah.
So how do we meet this, not match it? So what I'm doing, even in the poem, is to reach from another context, right? I am your cabin, your boots, your rucksack, which is, I'm an 80s kid, right? So I have a punk rock background. And that's probably one of the most punk rock things that I could say. Because as you know, growing up in any kind of, society in the world in which these economic systems are holding, we have been taught not to be our children's cabins. We have been taught not to be their rucksack, not to be their boots. If you want to have a successful, individualistic adult, you've got to cut them free. You've got to make them feel the pain so they go out in the world and they can be an individual success. So that line, I'll be your cabin, your boots, your rucksack. I'm going to be here. You can take shelter. I'll be your boots. You can walk on me. Right?
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I'll be your rucksack.
Yeah.
I'll carry for you.
Yeah.
I'll be your cabin.
Yeah.
And that's not the way we are taught to parent. And it's like this incredible radical question. Like, how would you raise your children differently if you knew they weren't leaving home?
That's
and think of
all
the difference in communication. Like just doing the dishes, making your bed, learning to do your laundry, participating in the family chores, right?
Yeah.
Right now, there's an implicit messaging that says you need to learn to do these things because one day you're going to have your own house and you have to know how to do them when you're an individuated person.
Yeah.
And so the cost of teaching them that lesson is very likely the relationship. I mean, how many times do I have to ask you to do these dishes? This is the 4th day in a row you haven't done these dishes. You need to learn how to keep your room clean. What kind of a person leaves their room like this? Seriously, this is disgusting.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
When was the last time you did your laundry? Okay. Now, if you knew that your child wasn't going to leave home, which in most parts of the world they actually don't, what would that look like? How would the discussion be different? And it might look like, hey, I'm super tired
This is
today.
not working for me. Yeah.
Can you do the dishes today? Instead of, you have to learn how to do,
Yeah, yeah. And there speaks fear behind it. You need because otherwise things won't be okay. It's
as
fearful.
opposed to this is how you nourish the relationships.
Yeah.
of the house you live within.
Yeah.
So, you can give your kids a chore wheel and you can say they got to do it you got to mow the lawn on Wednesday and do the dishes on Thursday and clean up the dog mess on Friday.
Yeah.
But pretty soon they learn to look at the chart and they are sick that night, or they have a friend over, or they find a way to wiggle out of it.
Yeah.
Because what you've taught them to do is to look at the chart, not look at the room. Right? And if you look at the room, you look at the relationships at the table, and I did the dishes last night, but look, that person's not feeling well, and this person's been on their feet all day, and well, actually, I'm not doing anything. I'll do the dishes.
Yeah.
Right? Which is in response to the relationships. That's the thing, when we were talking earlier, we've obscured this relational perception muscle. It's atrophied because we look to the chart and not to the table, right? To meet, not to match.
Yeah.
And the cost is so high that I can't even tell you how many families I know that have really sad relationships with their kids because in order to get them to pass math, they humiliated their kids. Because that's what we were taught to do. And that the cost of creating an individualized being that would succeed in an individualistic society is relationships to the past and the future. How are we going to do ecology when this is what we're doing at home?
And this is what you call, like, I guess, warm data, right? This is the data we need to work with. The data that touches upon the fact that everything has to do with contextualities. It's multiple contexts we're operating in. We're in constant relationships that we cannot even describe. I mean, the second 5 minutes down this conversation, it will be a different conversation.
That's right.
It will be different. And with that warm data, we have to work to fix the problems we are in at the world. Is that a way to put it? And whereas cold data would be measure everything and sort of put it in our smartest AIs that will fix our problems for us. Cool.
If we just have a big enough spreadsheet, we can put all of the contexts in there.
Exactly.
And then we can figure out how to control them.
Yeah.
No, yeah. I mean, that's just not how life works. So I guess, the thing with warm data, some people feel like warm data is like the soft stuff, the woo, the kind of touchy-feely, the emotional aspects. No. It's much more rigorous than that. It's what is happening in the combining of information. Okay, so, you could pipe in, let's say you have a kid that's struggling, all right, in whatever, 5th grade or something, all right? So you could pipe in information about that kid's family, about their economics. You could pipe in something from the doctors. You could pipe in their education information. You could pipe in any kind of legal questions that are going on with them. You could pipe in historical questions, their technological, time online, all these streams of information you could get. Okay, but it doesn't really tell you anything about the child. Because what we're looking for is the way that all of these different contexts are combining. How does the technological, the screen time, come into relationship with the family history? When you say to your kid, when I was a kid, we played till after dark outside. And what you're saying isn't really about technology. It's about history.
Yeah. Right?
How does the child, what's happening in education conflict with family? Well, you're getting an education that's nothing like the one I had, just as an example.
Yeah.
Right? Or culture.
Yeah.
Or, what happened with the pandemic is a fantastic example of all of us had to go to these schools all the time and every semester counted and da-da-da-da. These kids, they had a pandemic and suddenly it was like, well, you can't go to school. And now there's a lot of people having trouble figuring out how to talk the kids into believing that they have to go to school.
Or people that have to get back to offices.
The illusion is broken.
One big global sort of example of cold data treatment of the pandemic, which sort of made us sort of aware that just doesn't work anymore. And another example that just brings to mind is the fact that when a company now would ask me if I'm happy about their service, sometimes I'm happy about the service. I just had an agent on the phone. We call it agents, people who help me, right? Yeah. That's already weird. And I'm happy about the service. And may I ask you to rank this service on a score from
1 to 10?
Then I say, you just asking this, just reduce that number.
Right.
Because I'm now I feel like I'm in transaction and you did this for this score.
Right.
And that's how messed up we are. We don't even see that this cold data approach on a warm data level is messing things up.
Right.
And from a more scientific physics perspective, I'd say, this is metaphorically speaking, of course, is that the measurement, of course, the act of measurement influences the measurement, right? Or is it observer effect? And we still think that we can go about and measure.
And it's going to be objective?
Exactly.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So the warm data is all these things that are combining.
Yeah.
And that's why it's tricky. Because we are not used to thinking of information like that. We're used to thinking of information as something you can grab, plop down, measure, state, define, research. And what we're talking about with warm data is something that's in constant relational responsiveness. And so I sometimes describe it as another species of information. Just don't even think about it in the same way, because if we don't practice perceiving and responding to a world that's actually alive, how will our responses support and nourish the living world?
Yeah. And you do this work with warm data in warm data labs, right? I'm just super curious how that works in a lab. So you experiment with this, or you make people aware of what warm data is and let them sort of work on problems with this warm data concept. To give an example, what does it look like to start working with warm data?
So first of all, it's holding at two different levels, at least. Okay, so from the outside looking in, what you might see is that there's a group of people and they're in little groups of 3 or 4. And they've been given a question. So let's say the question is something, it's going to be something that's going to hold a lot of complexity. Like, what is home in a changing world? What is home?
Yeah.
Okay, so you just think about that for a second, all right?
Yeah.
And then each little group is going to have a context. So economy, family, history, culture, technology, politics, law, identity.
Yeah.
Okay? And then the people move around whenever they want to move around. And they just sit there. They talk to whoever they're talking to. I try to encourage people just to, if stories come up, to tell a story. Because like I said earlier, whenever you're telling a story, you are actually speaking completely transcontextually. And when you tell a story, something really interesting happens. And that is that the person you're speaking with, or the people, remember their stories, right? Your story reminds me of a story. And then before I even speak that story, I'm reminded of another story. So all these stories are sort of, and impressions from our stories and other people's stories are lighting up. Okay, and then when you move, let's say you start an economy and you go to family and then you go to technology and then you go to culture. Each time you go, more stories are crossing across more contexts. And so most of what happens in a warm data lab, you would never find on the transcript. These are not conventional productive conversations in the sense that you would come out with a flip chart and, a bullet.
These are the goals.
Yeah. I'm not interested at all, actually, in what anybody says. in the conversation. You cannot be the clever one in a warm data. Nobody cares. What's interesting is what stories your story reminded me about. And how those stories come up quickly in the course of an hour, and they start to overlap and sort of do a moire phenomenon, a living moire phenomenon with other stories, so that I'm actually able to perceive my own memories in a new way without being explicit about it. I never know. When I attend a warm table, I never know what's going to come up for me, or what was bothering me, or what was ready to move. But old things shift. Oh my God, I perceived that, my brother didn't like me for so many years. And oh my God, now I'm seeing that actually there was this other context.
Yeah.
Right? Or things like that. Weird things happen. People quit smoking. They suddenly make friends with someone.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
But I never know what's going to happen. What I do know is that there is a necessity to address the deep undercurrents that are actually knitting together our habits of perception, to get them moving. How they move, where they move, I don't know. But the Warm Data Lab will get them moving. And once I can perceive my own life in multiple contexts, my own memories in that complexity, I can start to perceive yours. So one of the things that happens with this is, first of all, that double binds get loosened because there's so many other contexts coming in. So it's a way of loosening those double binds. Secondly, in a world of polarity and polarized positionings, there's really no way to hold polarization in a warm data lab. So it's very healing for people who have been polarized who might otherwise be there to help each other. So it's great for communities that are which community in the world is not dealing with polarization right now?
Yeah.
Also, there's a kind of ecological experience of mutual learning that all the people in the lab are learning together. They're not learning the same thing, but they're learning together. No one's had the same experience because they've all moved through different conversations, but they've all experienced something having to do with the way that it's possible to perceive multiple contextual processes simultaneously. If I started off by saying, okay, now everybody, we're going to look at things through 5 different contexts or 8 different contexts, people would look at me and they'd be like, this is so abstract. But once you start seeing your own personal stories in those multiple contexts, it's not abstract at all. It's the most practical thing in the world.
And people get out of these labs sort of transformed in a sense, or in their life later on, perhaps transformation might happen.
Something can happen. And, one of the things I see happening is that there's a lot more integrity. A lot more integrity and generosity. So those 2 things we could use a lot more of.
Oh, we definitely could. Do you have a sort of an idea about the mechanism at play here? I mean, sort of from sort of analytic idealism, you'd say that sort of -1 in the end, or sort of the end ontology would be a universal mind, and we are dissociated from it as sort of blobs of mind. And there's a mind of life, but it's like this, it can flow. And then, of course, speculation starts. Would death be that my blob of mind opens up to the large? I get returned to the ocean of primordial awareness. All sorts. But hearing you talk about this warm data lab, it does seem to play into that analytically, that something's happening there on that mind level. I've also interviewed people on sort of psychedelic sciences. The philosophy around that, is it sort of boundary dissolution? What Terence McKenna used to call it, what sort of the psychedelics can do for you, meditation can do it also. Different sorts. what are your thoughts on this sort of mechanism at play here?
I
mechanism is not a nice word for it, but
I think for me, it comes down to sort of a lifelong project of how do you get people to understand complexity, right? And teaching systems theory and complexity theory. And it was always, the system was over there, and here's the model, and this is like this, and this is like this. And the people who somehow already knew the vocabulary leave the room feeling extra clever, and the people who didn't still don't. And this sort of failure of transmission or shared ongoing exploration of the question of like, what's happening in a complex system? Because you are a complex system and I am, and we're in them. And how do we actually experience that when the filters through which we see life have cut all of those receptors off? This is an educational experience. This is an economic experience. This is a love experience. And of course, all of them are all of it. But that practice of perceiving these complex systems and multiple contexts at play has been very, very difficult to reintroduce into groups of people from cultures that are living in a fragmented world. I mean, if you look to Ubuntu, you look to the medicine wheel, you look to the Vedas, you're going to see the same material. But for most people, not all, but for most people, they're so many generations into this fragmentation and the brokenness that's come from the fragmentation, the second, third order issues of fragmentation. You can't just then say, hey, it's all one, man. You know, because it isn't.
I get you.
It isn't all one, man.
Yeah.
And so
you have this sort of healthy it's not anti, but you're right, sort of being brought up in a new age sort of world, right? You have sort of a healthy dose of allergy. Is that a word to put it?
That's right.
For it? Yeah. But I like it because I think it's so relevant in today, because what I see right now, and I hear you saying that, because that's not how I intended my question, sort of in search of like a one mind, etc. But because what I take very seriously is the risk of what is called sort of spiritual bypassing. So the fact that I can tell these stories that just make me feel nice and with my philosophy of idealism, whereas I have to do the hard work of really meeting what it means to be in this, what your poem is about. So I really feel that one. But on the other hand, I also think we do need it. I do need that deeper story of a fundamental truth that just resonates more deeply within me than the old story that I'm just a bunch of molecules that happen to be conscious in a universe that doesn't care. And I do need that deeper story. And I'm truly sometimes, I'm aware I might be bypassing, I might be using it for a placebo reason. What are your thoughts here? I mean, hearing me.
I mean, for me, it's always been, like I was saying earlier, just the life is sacred. You're part of life. That's a sacred act. That means every moment is in communication and relationship with so much that is also sacred. How can I best show up for that? How can I best be sensitized toward that? So that's where I don't feel lost without the oneness. I'm really excited. It's, I'm not saying that there's not oneness at all. I'm just saying that it's really beautiful to be in the meadow of all the different organisms that are together meadowing, right? Let's call the meadow the oneness, and all the organisms that are making the meadow in this beautiful sacred dance, you know? Yeah. And so I don't want to lose sight of the dance because I'm in the dance.
Yeah.
So
beautiful.
Yeah.
And what I also take from it is that it's all one, that oneness can sort of imply a wish towards transcendence, which is not what we perhaps might need right now. You also critiqued in your presentation sort of the whole program of transhumanism and transcendence of the natural. Mm-hmm. It's like a weird agenda that also echoes, I think, sort of rapture ideologies, some forms of Christianity, etc. But now just in a new jacket of hijacked by sort of hyper technology, making it much more dangerous, I think, in a sense, which is not what we need right now. But it all comes from thinking that there is sort of a higher oneness or a higher level I can transcend to, whereas I should be meadowing, I should be dancing. That's at least what it sort of resonates with me.
I guess so. I mean, I think for me, the inquiry has always been, and certainly this is an extension of my dad's work and his dad's work. The inquiry is around what's happening in these relationships, what's happening in this communication, where does this reflect back on other generations and other organisms and other contexts, and just the fascination with like how we came to have this conversation. And for example, or how you tell your kids to do the dishes. And those things are equally as important. They're equally an expression of your perception of the world.
Yeah.
Let alone, how you ride the bus or take care of your parents or don't, or, like everything we do is an expression of that initial sort of perception of how you're learning to be in the world. If you had been born 15,000 years ago, how would you be living differently? What would your hands hold in a day? What would they make? What would they heal? What would they do? Same hands. I mean, physiologically, you haven't changed that much in 15,000 years. And yet, life has changed a great deal. So when we say, yeah, but that's not how life is, you can't just think about things transcontextually and deal with the warm data. That's not how life is. What are you talking about? Which is? It is absolutely possible that life can be different. It always has been different. So that thing of where are those places where we can nourish the possibility for ways of being together differently that support life and learning and curiosity and integrity and generosity. And that means that we're going to have to face that a lot of the things that came before have actually been detrimental to those things.
Yeah, there's this, I feel this urge always for myself and people watching to make it practical. What can I do now? What can I do today? And I know, sensing, reading your book, that might be part of the problem. That sort of urge for practical solutions. What can we do now? Because it very much relates to that sort of matching, right? I want to match it. But what are your thoughts there? Because we are in deep trouble, and those boots that you want to be for your children, they need to be polished. They need to be ready to meet the sort of challenges ahead. So that requires work. So, what are your thoughts here? That urge, that wish for practicality and.
Well, first, I want to say that a change in perception is an action. That is an action. And people sometimes ask me, like, what does warm data do? And I say, nothing. It doesn't do anything because it's doing everything. Right? If you have a shift in the premises and the base of your perception, it changes the way you do everything. The way you communicate with the robot online, the way you perceive the other people who are walking down the street, the way you are with your children, the way you are with your spouse, the way you think about the past generations, the way you think about the future generations, the way everything changes. So we could point to specifics and the practicality of that, but I think I would rather take that word practicality and make it into practice. What is the practice in which there is a shift of perception? And where do you practice? When do you practice? How do you practice that? And my response to that would be in every moment of the day. You have the possibility. Where did the glass come from? What's happening with the water? What is the way in which I might perceive how much water I've had or not had? And, there's so, like, everything that we do in a day or don't do is an action. So how are we perceiving that? How much context is there? If you just, you can look at your blue jeans or your breakfast or your kid's math assignment and think about what's happening in this communication. What are the relationships that have made this moment come to be?
Yeah.
And how do we respond to it in a way that allows for there to be movement, to be shifting, right? So one of my stepsons was having a hard time with math. And he's a fantastic artist and hated math. And so it came to our attention that if something didn't happen, that he was going to actually fail math, and then he wouldn't be able to go to art school. So what do you do? What do you do? Well, the obvious thing you do is you match. You got a problem with math, you take him to the math tutor, you get him math help, you address the math problem. But that's not what we did. Because if we had done that, he might have passed math, but what else would have happened? So we brought the kids together, and all his older brothers and sisters said, well, we'll help with math. And they came over taking turns on Sundays, and I made a big plate of food, and they spent the night, and the whole living room was filled with the family helping with the math. And then one weekend, I had to go do a seminar somewhere. And I asked this kid, can you help take care of my 95-year-old mother? Okay? Because once we had this family coming together, helping each other every Sunday, we suddenly had a culture of family helping each other. It was not everybody for themselves anymore. Everybody's helping everybody now. So it was totally logical for me to say, can you help with my mother while I'm gone for the weekend?
Yeah.
Sure. So he's helping with my mother. Now, I don't know that there's many ways to make life look more vital than to be in service to someone who's close to death. And to get this 17-year-old kid to spend the weekend, not with his friends, not at parties, not running around, but with my mother, who was close to death. And at the end of that weekend, he had a very different set of ideas about things. And went into school the next week and totally addressed math differently. So where's the change? Where was it? But do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So this is the questions that we're asking here are how, if you have a situation like this where things are out of relationship, people are polarizing, and in the polarization is humiliation, is further isolation, is, everything we're trying to make is going to be in the relationship. And yet so much of our world is about breaking down relationship, using relationship to destroy relationship. So instead of getting that math tutor, we probably could have got him a good grade. But at what cost? Whereas this way,
beautiful.
There was a whole family relational there was so much that happened in that when he actually went into math, he went in with a different sense of what his life was about. Right? That's what I mean when I say warm data doesn't change anything, because it changes everything.
This is a warm story, yeah. For me, these things have to do with my notion of self and my notion of how do I relate to these contexts. I lately am becoming more aware of how I relate to objects and what sort of example or bad example I give my kids. We have too many stuff in the house, so I cannot give just an old bike, old equipment laying around rusty because I left it in the rain. I think that's not a nice relationship to an object I want to teach my children, but happens because I'm cluttered, I have too much. So I'm becoming aware of my relationship with objects other than just being the owner of it. And I'm sensing I'm in a relation with these objects, if only because my children see how I relate to it and it teaches them something about the world they live in. So already there it has something, that aspect. And in your book and your presentation, you also point to that. So that question, not sort of clinically cold asking, who am I or who can I be, but bringing context in. Who can I be when I'm with you? Who can I be? Maybe stupid in this building. I'm in this building. So,
absolutely.
Right?
Right.
Yeah. Questions like these. So I like that. Is that a sort of a rule of thumb people can sort of, whenever you come to this identity question, bring relationship in?
I think it's an important way to move the positioning of the way you see yourself, right? And certainly there has been training to ask, who am I? How do I be a better person? How do I get ahead in life? How do I become a success? How do I become spiritually enlightened? How do I, whatever, I. And, I mean, I grew up around this. This is the whole self-help thing. This is, there's a whole lot of notions of
the human potential,
personal,
right?
Development and so on. And yet we all know, that the way you are with one friend is so different than how you are with someone else. Sometimes you're the clever one. Sometimes you're the funny one. Sometimes you're the serious one. Sometimes you're the wise one. Sometimes you are totally formal and stuck and you can't say anything and there's no way you can let yourself shine. And other times you totally overdo it, right? Who are you in this circumstance, in that circumstance? And you change very much, not because you're inauthentic, but because you are a living organism responding to the complexity around you. So in the Warm Data Lab, when people are randomly getting piled in with other people, I don't know what anyone's going to say. I mean, it's most people who run like group facilitation projects get super nervous. Like, what is going to happen? And I'm always like, it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
We have no idea what's
Yeah.
going to happen, but it's going to be fine. Why is it going to be fine? In a world of polarization where everybody is pretty much polarized in some way against pretty much everybody else, depending on what topic you happen to be discussing.
Yeah.
How in the world is it going to be okay? And what happens is that people make adjustments. And And who can I be when I'm with you? Who can you be when you're with me? And because of the structure of the lab with all the different contexts and the question, one of the things that happens is people cannot speak from their scripts. So we have polarization when we don't have context. In order to generate polarization, you have to remove context. Think about that. All right, so when we get all the context back in there, usually it's like, well, we're discussing health and we are not bringing in the economic thing. But in the lab, economics is right there. It's there. You may not be in that context, but it's there. So disrupting the rehearsed scripts, most of the polarizations lie in pre-rehearsed algorithmic scripts. This is how I feel about vaccines. This is how I feel about Gaza. This is how I feel about AI. This is how I feel about gender. This is how I feel about, right? And we have practiced what we're going to say.
Yeah.
But when the personal stories come out and they're deeply detailed, and we're not talking about gender, we're not talking about war, we're not talking about health, we're talking about personal stories, that polarization is irrelevant. So I've had groups of people together that were, violently, people whose families had been, killing each other in those rooms. And Russians and Ukrainians and Muslims and Jews. And every time I'm terrified that it's not going to work, but it keeps working. It keeps holding. So there's something there. There is still so much room for us to be in our humanity together.
Great. And it's so beautiful that I'm sort of very aware of the naming of it. Like I don't want to call it your data lab a tool, because but it just makes me aware of how trapped we are in mechanistic language, in industrial words for this. So whatever, it's a practice. It's a practice. Let's call it that. And it's beautiful and good to know for people who watch this. We are about sort of rigorous science, and this is based on the work of your father that you've continued doing scientifically, and it goes back to cybernetics, and it now touches upon biosemiotics, and this is hardcore science. And the other story is becoming more and more the scientism. It's a story of sort of where you leave so much out, and you don't see that your model, that you just confound the map of reality with what reality truly is. And a thing where I find it painful, you talk about in your Warm Data Labs also about lifeboating, and you refer to a thought experiment by the
Garrett Hardin.
Yeah, Hardin, who came up with that thought experiment, sort of, and it touches on sort of what's called effective altruism. What do you do in these hardcore situations where you have to pick one? You have multiple of these. Like one person on the train that you have to, you cannot stop the train. Are you saving that person and people? You're going to kill people. And that lifeboat example is on that sort of. It's about being in a lifeboat with just place for, what is it? How many people?
Yeah, I think the original story is that there's room for 50 people on the lifeboat, and there's 100 drowning people in the water.
Yeah.
And how are you going to choose who you're going to save? Because if you put everybody on the boat will sink.
Nobody
This
survives.
is hard life, man. This is how it is.
Yeah.
You're going to have to make decisions like this, and you're going to have to think of the meta messaging that's going on just in the question. To think this is an ethics question.
That's interesting. So it's not for you an ethics question, because that's how we see these thought experiments. They're philosophical thought experiments that relate to ethics.
Yeah, but look at the lack of ethics in the question. It's so dark. And so, of course, what happens is if you ask a bad question, you get bad responses. If you ask a question like, who are you going to save? People are going to come up with responses like, well, should we save the people with children so they can be parents? Should we save the elderly because they're wise? Should we save the people who are healthy because they're strong, or the people who aren't healthy because you can't abandon the sick? Or these are eugenics questions. These are really disgusting questions. Because the people that are in the water are not floating numbers. They're not floating categories of people. They're people. They're you, they're me.
Yeah.
They're, they're complex people with complex lives. Who in the world would you be to decide?
And if you take that mindset, so you just do not ask that cold question, but you just see them as people, because in your warm data lab, I suppose you work like that. And then
exactly
possibilities open up that you weren't aware of?
So many possibilities open up.
The boat cannot carry more people, though.
The boat cannot carry more people, but you can figure it out. You can, I don't know, it depends on who's on the boat and who's in the water and what you're going to figure out together. Somebody might be a great swimmer. Somebody might not know how to swim, but they might be good at doing this or that. Somebody, who can I be when I'm with you? What if I think I'm super good at engineering or boat fixing, and then I'm with you and I realize, oh, but when I'm with you, what I'm good at is taking care of the babies, or I'm good at making humor so people keep their spirits up, or I'm good at tying clothes together so we figure it out. If I'm on the boat and there's 100 people in the water and 50 seats, I'm not leaving anybody behind. I'm pretty sure you're not either.
No.
I'm going to do every possible thing to drag people, pull people, take turns swimming, do 1,000 other things that besides just put 50 people in chairs because of their category. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
It's like, but of course, Garrett Hardin was a eugenicist. So it's not an accident that this is a eugenics question, but it's the same kind of question that's laced into so much, actually, of our questions around, how do we model sustainable living? Looking at the human being who's on the ground in the territory as a unit that uses resources.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, people in Sweden hardly eat any soy, right? People in Japan might need more soy. People, what do people need?
Yeah.
Well, nutrition itself is not a one size fits all thing. If you're trying to feed the world, you don't need to feed them all the same nutrition packet.
And it's also for me, it's also a story of sort of binary modes of thinking. Let's call it digital, algorithmic versus sort of noisy, where the solutions might be in the noise. We also heard Dennis Noble talk yesterday with a beautiful, and that harnessing stochasticity. So it's about sort of the noise in that group of people, which you think is noise. Your story about your life, I mean, that doesn't matter. The boat has 50 places. But what if that story tells me something that does something in how I see you, and then that's what you're talking about. That's noise that becomes a signal. Or
in that you're going to find so much possibility. And if you're in this other way of thinking, the reductionist way of thinking, the possibility is edited out of the perception.
Yeah.
And I don't think we can afford to do that right now.
Yeah. And on a sort of communications level, we're making a podcast right now, and I hope to bring this message to the world. The struggle I sometimes feel is that in a culture that still is mechanistic, industrial, I have to speak that language. You must experience a problem like that. You have this warm data story, but because of warm data that...
Yeah.
So that sometimes, even if you don't like it, you have to bring in sort of the mathematics or the cybernetics or stuff to just make it rigorous. What are your thoughts there on how to just communicate this? Or
Well, it totally depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to a bunch of scientists and academics, then you have to dabble in all the academic underpinnings, which there is plenty.
Yeah. We can put that in description, right? For people who think this is a soft story, we can give you the science, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's there's lots of science. But more often than not, I'm talking to somebody who really doesn't care what's going on in academia. And they want to know, why should I be interested? What do you mean complexity? I don't want complexity. I want my life to just be simple. I got to go to work on Monday. I don't want to hear about complexity, in which case I'm like, okay, let's talk about beer. Right? You're talking about beer. Okay, so what's beer? Is beer the stuff in your glass? Is it the hops? You like a good hops, right? You like an IPA. Is it the distribution? Is it the culture of the pub? Is it the weekend? Is it the economics? Is it the actual fermentation process? Is it the music? Where's the beer? So sometimes it's like that. Other times I'm talking to somebody and they don't care about beer and they don't care about academia. Imagine that. And then
That's
it's
everywhere.
like, how do you know when to tell somebody that you love them? How do you know when to do that? Because if you say it at the wrong time, you can blow it.
Yeah.
And if you don't say it, you can blow it.
Yeah.
So how do you know? Is it because you've been on 5 dates or it's been 5 months or no? There's not a formula for this. You're going to have to feel into it. Right? That's the warm data. You know how to do warm data. You do it all the time. There's never been a business deal without warm data. So don't tell me you're in business and you don't understand warm data. Right? It's always been warm data.
Yeah.
So same with the medical world, right? A good doctor, a good teacher has always been that one that could see something. I see, you look okay, your vitals are good, but, how long has your hair been that dry? They see something that nobody else saw. Why did they see that thing? What relationships are they seeing? Right? My kids used to think I was totally psychic. I'd be like, you got to put your coat on before you go outside because it's going to rain today. And they'd be like, no, it's nice. I'm not wearing my coat. You're taking your coat because it's going to rain. And then it rains and they think, Mom's psychic. I'm not psychic. But it's not that hard after a while to perceive the phenomenon.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what phenomena are you perceiving? How do you respond? Openness,
yeah, to that all. My final question to you, Nora, I really enjoyed talking to you. Are you in the end, the beautiful poem about motherhood now, which resonated with me strongly, which can lead sort of this just weigh heavy, right? The story can weigh heavy. Are you in the end, does the hope still, are you more hopeful, or how is that for you?
Well, I think for me, probably the piece that I am most terrified of our being in this meta-crisis, polycrisis, multi-crisis, omni-crisis, is not the actual problems, but the need to seek solace in finding solutions that are totally inadequate. We're doing good because we are, recycling bottle caps. Like, oh, come on. The issues that we're facing require that moment of taking a step back, seeing that the situation is much worse than you thought. And then recognizing that as a living organism, you are in fact, I am in fact, we are all actually participants in creation itself. We are creative. You can't actually stop people from being creative.
And
But if you illustrate one iota, one small fraction of a fragmented problem and ask people to find a solution, they're going to find one. And that solution is going to cause more problems. If you lay it all out and everything is completely impossible, and oh my God, what are we going to do? They'll sit there for a minute with a great big bellyache. And in about 20 minutes, they'll start to work on it. That's my experience. So the thing that gives me hope is to go to the place where it looks like there's none and to see the creative process take place. The thing that gives me the least amount of hope is false hope.
Thank you very much for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.